September 1, 1995. The courtroom in Ontario went still as Paul Bernardo faced the judge. The man whose name had become synonymous with terror across Scarborough and St. Catharines, whose crimes fractured families and stunned an entire country, was about to hear a sentence that would define the rest of his existence. What the court imposed that day was not merely a legal punishment. It was the beginning of a reality many believe surpasses any death sentence Canada could ever enforce. When the cameras shut off and public outrage slowly faded from breaking news into collective memory, Bernardo vanished into a system designed specifically to manage men the public never wants to see again. Yet Canada never truly looked away. He received a life sentence with no possibility of parole for 25 years, paired with the dangerous offender designation, a rare legal label that grants the state extraordinary power to confine someone indefinitely. The message from the court was unmistakable. Paul Bernardo was expected to die in prison. To many, execution would have seemed cleaner, faster, and more proportionate to the harm he caused. Others believe something far more severe was chosen, keeping him alive inside institutions built to isolate, control, and psychologically erode the most reviled inmates may be the only punishment that mirrors the fear he once imposed on entire communities. And by the end of this video, you will understand why Paul Bernardo's life behind bars may represent a fate far worse than death. I want you to tell me in the comments whether you believe this is justice or cruelty. The dangerous offender designation issued in 1995 did more than determine the length of Paul Bernardo's sentence. It dictated the conditions under which every remaining year of his life would be lived. Canadian authorities understood immediately that traditional incarceration would not apply. His notoriety, the brutality of his crimes, and the emotional weight attached to his name created a situation where standard population housing would almost certainly result in violence. The system moved quickly to assert control, not out of concern for his comfort, but to prevent instability that could ripple through entire institutions. Officials recognized that placing him among other inmates would create an unmanageable threat environment. In prison culture, certain crimes permanently mark an individual. His offenses placed him at the absolute bottom of inmate hierarchy, where survival often depends on constant protection. The objective became containment. Control of movement, strict supervision, and complete limitation of contact were prioritized to neutralize the risk his presence posed to others and to institutional order itself. His arrival at Kingston Penitentiary marked the start of an existence governed by restriction rather than rehabilitation. Kingston, already infamous for housing the country's most volatile offenders, imposed immediate safeguards. Transfers occurred only under escort. Interactions with staff were conducted behind barriers. Every procedural decision reflected the same conclusion. His presence required extraordinary measures. Protective custody was not framed as leniency. It was a necessity. Within prison walls, reputation travels faster than records. His name alone carried the weight of violence. Even as institutions modernized and inmates cycled through, the threat attached to him never diminished. Surveillance became permanent. Isolation became routine. Fear, though largely invisible, defined the environment around him. To understand how he arrived at that cell, the story must rewind decades earlier. Paul Bernardo was born on August 27, 1964, in Scarborough, Ontario. He was the youngest of 3 children raised in a household marked by instability and emotional neglect. His father later faced accusations related to sexual abuse within the family, creating an environment shaped by secrecy and dysfunction. His mother, overwhelmed and withdrawn, struggled to provide structure or protection. As he grew, troubling patterns emerged. His behavior reflected an early fixation on dominance and control, particularly in sexual contexts. These were not sudden developments, but attitudes shaped gradually through adolescence. Incidents of cruelty, fascination with fire, and disturbing humor suggested a worldview forming beneath the surface. By his teenage years, his fantasies centered on possession and entitlement. Women were not perceived as equals but as objects to be controlled. At 16, he learned the man he believed to be his father was not biologically related to him. The revelation intensified resentment and reinforced feelings of betrayal. His relationship with his mother deteriorated into hostility, marked by verbal aggression and emotional distance. College offered no reset. At the University of Toronto Scarborough, he presented as confident and socially capable, yet patterns of manipulation and aggression continued privately. Romantic relationships were characterized by coercion and intimidation. By the mid-1980s, restraining orders and obscene phone calls began appearing in his record, early warnings that would later be viewed as missed signals. When he met Karla Homolka in 1987, the dynamic shifted. Rather than curbing his behavior, the relationship amplified it. She validated impulses that had previously existed in isolation. Together, they formed a partnership that allowed his fantasies to evolve into action. By the late 1980s, his violence moved from imagination into public spaces. Streets once considered safe became hunting grounds. Between 1986 and 1990, assaults occurred with increasing frequency. Victims were targeted based on vulnerability. Surprise and isolation were used to overpower resistance. Each attack reinforced his sense of control. Community fear grew as attacks continued without arrest. Police issued warnings. Composite sketches circulated. But forensic limitations delayed identification. Biological evidence existed, yet technology lagged. During those years, the absence of consequences deepened his belief that he could continue without being stopped. With each assault, boundaries eroded. The progression toward lethal violence became inevitable. And by the end of the decade, the pattern that defined his crimes collided with an event that would permanently alter the trajectory of multiple lives. That collision occurred inside the Homolka household in December 1990. What had begun as violence against strangers crossed into an act of betrayal within the family itself. Karla Homolka's younger sister, Tammy, was 15 years old. She was still in high school, still living under the assumption of safety that comes with home. Behind the scenes, Bernardo and Homolka had begun discussing access to a victim who could not escape. Their plan relied on sedatives obtained through Homolka's employment at a veterinary clinic. On the night of December 23rd, Tammy was given Valium and exposed to halothane vapors. The assault that followed was recorded. Though the footage was never publicly released, investigators later described it in detached clinical terms. Tammy remained unconscious. During the assault, she vomited, leading to airway obstruction. She died from respiratory failure. When emergency responders arrived, the explanation offered suggested an accident. There were no immediate signs of forced harm. The death was ruled accidental. Outwardly, life resumed. Inwardly, a threshold had been crossed. The secrecy surrounding Tammy's death emboldened them. It reinforced the belief that consequences could be avoided. From that point forward, Homolka's role shifted. She was no longer passive. She became an active participant. In the months that followed, their crimes escalated in coordination and severity. By the summer of 1991, the violence that once unfolded sporadically became methodical. On June 15, 1991, 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey was locked out of her Burlington home after missing curfew. Bernardo encountered her outside. She was taken to their house and held captive. The abuse was recorded. Her death was not attributed to a single act but to prolonged deprivation and violence. Afterward, her body was dismembered and encased in concrete blocks. Fishermen later discovered the remains in Lake Gibson. Less than a year later, on April 16, 1992, 15-year-old Kristen French was abducted in daylight near a church parking lot in St. Catharines. She was taken to the same house. She remained conscious during captivity. Her death came by strangulation. Her body was left intact and discovered weeks later. The lack of concealment marked a shift. Fear of discovery had diminished. The murders triggered a national response. The scale of violence, the videotaped evidence, and the involvement of two offenders transformed the investigation. Fear expanded beyond Scarborough. When forensic testing finally caught up with stored evidence, DNA linked Bernardo to multiple assaults. On February 17, 1993, he was arrested. The prosecution faced a dilemma. Videotapes were missing. Homolka offered testimony in exchange for leniency. Prosecutors accepted the deal. She received a 12-year sentence. When the tapes resurfaced later, revealing her active involvement, public outrage erupted. The deal stood. Bernardo was convicted on September 1, 1995. 2 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of aggravated sexual assault, kidnapping, confinement. He was designated a dangerous offender. The sentence ensured indefinite confinement. When the courtroom doors closed, his public life ended. Institutional control replaced public scrutiny. Kingston Penitentiary became his first destination. Officials assessed his risk and reached an immediate conclusion. He could not exist in general population. Protective custody was mandatory. Segregation followed. Individual cells, limited movement, constant observation. Kingston's aging structure amplified isolation. Narrow corridors, steel doors, fluorescent lighting. Every interaction required approval. Autonomy disappeared. This was not a sentence measured in years. It was measured in repetition. Days defined by confinement. Hours defined by silence. A life reduced to routine and surveillance. Life in protective custody follows a rhythm that never changes. Each day begins with observation through a narrow slot. Hours are spent in a cell scarcely larger than a storage room, approximately 6 feet by 9 feet. A cot, a sink, a toilet, everything bolted down. There is no privacy, no personalization. He spends nearly 23 hours per day inside that space. The remaining hour is designated for outdoor time. For inmates in his classification, that time occurs alone, inside enclosed yards under constant watch. There is no social contact, no shared programs, no spontaneous interaction. Every movement is calculated to avoid proximity to others. Threats are not hypothetical. His crimes guarantee hostility. Over the years, attempts have been made to reach him. Each incident reinforced the need for isolation. The psychological effects of prolonged segregation are well documented. Monotony erodes perception of time. Days blend into one another. Concentration declines. Emotional responses flatten. Hypervigilance becomes constant. Clinical evaluations noted his high psychopathy score, indicating emotional detachment and manipulative traits. Yet even individuals with such profiles deteriorate under unchanging isolation. When Kingston Penitentiary closed in 2013, authorities faced another challenge. Placement options were limited. He was transferred to Millhaven Institution, another maximum security facility. Conditions remained largely unchanged. Segregated housing, constant supervision, restricted movement. Every assessment reached the same conclusion. Integration was impossible. In 2023, his transfer to La Macasa Institution, a medium security facility, sparked national outrage. Many questioned how such a move aligned with public safety. Officials cited legislative requirements emphasizing individualized assessment. The decision reignited debates about justice and accountability. Despite eligibility for parole after 25 years, every review produced the same outcome. He remained a continuing risk. Psychological evaluations cited lack of empathy and entrenched patterns of sexual violence. Parole was denied in 2018, 2021, and again in 2024. Each hearing reinforced certainty. Release was not an option. In 2015, he published a violent work of fiction from prison. The book briefly appeared online before public backlash forced its removal. For many, it confirmed that the tendencies driving his crimes persisted. The legacy of the crimes extends far beyond prison walls. Families continue to endure renewed pain with every headline. The case reshaped forensic policy and prosecutorial debate across Canada. Early failures led to reform. Public awareness shifted permanently. His life is now defined by isolation, scrutiny, and permanence. Transfers change nothing. Parole hearings change nothing. There is no reintegration, no anonymity, no end date. His punishment continues as long as he lives. The question remains, is this existence, lived in isolation and perpetual threat, more severe than death? The aftermath of the Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka crimes continues to reverberate across Canada. For the families of Leslie Mahaffey, Kristen French, Tammy Homolka, and the many survivors connected to his assaults, the impact did not conclude with verdicts or sentences. Their lives were permanently reshaped by loss, ongoing public scrutiny, and the heavy knowledge that their suffering became part of the nation's collective consciousness. Each passing anniversary, every parole review, and every renewed media discussion reopens wounds that never fully heal. Time has not softened the pain. Beyond individual families, this case altered how Canada approaches public safety and criminal accountability. Early failures in DNA processing exposed systemic weaknesses, prompting nationwide reforms that modernized forensic testing and reduced delays that once allowed predators to remain unidentified. Police agencies adopted new methods for managing serial crimes, introducing coordinated task forces and centralized databases that were absent during the early Scarborough attacks. Schools, transit authorities, and youth organizations reassessed safety protocols, particularly for young people traveling alone. These changes emerged from tragedy, driven by a public unwilling to ignore the lessons written in loss. Communities also became more aware of vulnerabilities that had previously gone unnoticed. Grassroots initiatives focused on education, prevention, and survivor support expanded across the country. At the same time, the legal consequences of Homolka's plea agreement left a lasting scar. Many Canadians struggled to reconcile her reduced sentence with later evidence revealing her deeper involvement. That controversy ignited decades of debate over prosecutorial discretion, transparency, and the ethical limits of plea bargaining in cases involving extreme harm. These discussions remain unresolved. Together, they form a national memory shaped not only by violence, but by the reckoning that followed. It is a legacy marked by vigilance, reform, and grief that has never fully faded. After nearly 40 years in custody, Bernardo's life has narrowed into a confined existence defined by isolation, constant monitoring, and unrelenting notoriety. Facilities have changed, policies have shifted, but the core reality has remained unchanged. He lives under restrictions without a foreseeable end, separated from others, closely supervised, and denied any meaningful hope of release. Every parole hearing reignites public awareness, ensuring that his crimes are never relegated to the past. Each institutional transfer sparks renewed debate about justice, punishment, and public safety. Families and communities are forced once again to confront memories they did not choose to carry. In practical terms, his punishment extends for the duration of his life. There is no finish line, no reintegration, and no anonymity waiting beyond the walls. His future exists within a closed cycle of confinement, evaluation, and surveillance. This leads to the central question: is a lifetime defined by isolation, danger, and permanent infamy more severe than death itself? Share your thoughts below. The impact of these crimes continues to ripple through families, institutions, and national policy. Lives were altered forever. Systems were changed. A country was forced to look inward. While he remains confined, the consequences extend far beyond any cell. His legacy is measured not in years served, but in irreversible loss. And no matter where he is held or how much time passes, he remains bound to the history he created. If this examination of his prison reality added perspective, subscribe for more uncompromising true crime investigations.